Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Becoming Anchored podcast. I'm super thrilled for today's episode. My name is Laura Deneen. I'm one of your hosts. Just really grateful to have you all with us today. If you're new to this platform, welcome. We are so thrilled to have you. My co-host, Lauren Jackson, and I really just talk about all sorts of concerns and mental health issues on the podcast, everything from body image to eating disorders, OCD, anxiety, rumination, all the things, and we're super glad to have you. The purpose of this podcast is twofold. So first and foremost, we talk about our lives and some of the pain and suffering that we have been through, and we're fairly open about some of our struggles. And then secondly, we have the amazing privilege of sitting with clients on a daily basis, and it's something that we truly cherish, and we are just so grateful. So welcome if you're here for the first time. If you're in the state of Tennessee, we would love to see you. Please reach out to us. If you are out of the state of Tennessee, please reach out to a therapist local to you if you're wanting support for your mental health. I am super thrilled to introduce Megan Chase to you all. She is a therapist with Anchored Counseling Company, and she also wears several other hats. She helps out with administrative duties from time to time, and then she's also more recently become our creative director, so she helps me with content and all of the ins and outs for both Anchored Counseling in Tennessee and Becoming Anchored Co. So today we're going to be talking about self-compassion for your inner critic. This is an important topic, so I'm super excited to dive in with you all today. So without further ado, welcome, Megan.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
Of course. Megan is so dear to me and everyone on this team. I actually recently referred to you as the glue. We had a team event at one of our gals' farms. She lives kind of in the country, and we all gathered for some lunch and just a sweet time together, and Megan got there, and I was like, oh my gosh, the glue's here.
That's so sweet.
And Megan is just so cherished, not only by the team, but by her clients. I think August is your 4-year work anniversary.
Yeah.
We actually met through a mutual dear friend. She's a childhood best friend of yours, and then has become a dear friend of mine over the years. And so I'm super excited for you all to learn about self-compassion from Megan.
Yeah.
So Megan, I know you use self-compassion often in your work with clients. I'm curious, first and foremost, I think that it's important for us to provide working definitions. So for our audience, if you all have not heard about the concept of self-compassion, as well as the concept of our inner critic, and I know that this is a lot of the work that you do with your clients. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what self-compassion is.
Yeah, so I think of self-compassion as just when you think about a loved one or a friend and they're going through a hard time, and what would you say to them? What would you do for them? Would you give them a hug? Would you, tell them, hey, it's going to be okay. Hey, this is a really hard moment you're going through right now. Yeah. And I just use that same language, and I say, okay, flip it back onto yourself. So, how can you be kind to yourself in that way? How can you take care of yourself in that way? So Kristen Neff, she is the guru for self-compassion. And she just talks about how, when we are hard on ourselves, instead of just beating ourselves up, instead of, being harsh on ourselves, can we just use some kindness towards ourselves?
Yeah.
It's kind of the basis of self-compassion is what I give clients and what I tell people about.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it can be really quite difficult when we are learning about self-compassion, because you just use that example of a loved one or a friend, or even something you might say to a colleague, right? If a colleague of yours makes a mistake and you're offering them some kindness, it can be it can be easy to offer another person kindness, and then quite difficult to offer that same kindness to ourselves, right? And that's what we see in a lot of clients of oh yeah, it's really easy to be kind to my friend, or this other person in my life, my spouse, my partner, but it can be quite difficult to offer ourselves that same kindness.
Yeah.
And I love that you brought Kristen Neff up. I really respect her a lot. She really is so foundational to the work of self-compassion. So she talks about self-compassion having 3 components. So the first component is recognizing when we are going through something difficult. So that's like a moment of pain and suffering. And y'all, like, we all go through pain and suffering in our lives. And we all go through hard things in our lives. So that's the first step, right? Recognizing that this is a moment of pain and suffering. Mm-hmm. The second step is mindfulness of an emotional state. So I don't know about you, but I'm a therapist and I can still get caught in the judgment of my emotions. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you've experienced this too, where
totally.
Like, gosh darn it, I'm angry right now. Why am I so angry? Mm-hmm. That's a judgment of an emotion, right? So what self-compassion is like noticing the anger without judgment. And that can be so difficult to do. We have to really stretch ourselves and practice that skill of noticing the emotion without the judgment. And then the third step is like, how can I be kind to myself in that moment? Mm-hmm. Is there anything that I can tell myself? Is there perhaps an affirmation? Do I need to seek out support from someone who is safe for me? What is like the next thing that I can do that is kind towards me? So those are the three basic components of self-compassion. Mm-hmm. And I know Megan does a wonderful job of like introducing that to clients, of teaching clients that framework. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you, I'm just curious, like, when you're giving your clients this education about self-compassion, what do you typically notice their responses are?
I think most of my clients respond with like saying, "Oh, well, I don't want to let myself off the hook. Like I'm mean to myself or I'm hard on myself because it motivates me."
Yeah, I mean, I've heard I'm lazy.
Yes.
Or I won't be able to get XYZ project done. Mm-hmm. Or a lot of clients will say like, well, how do I do that? Like, I don't know how to do self-compassion. I don't know how to actually practice this. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think this is important to talk about as well. Just because we know about a concept doesn't mean that we are going to be able to like automatically begin practicing it, right? And so these are barriers that we as therapists are often talking to our clients about. And for today's episode, we are talking about self-compassion for your inner critic. Mm-hmm. So, Megan, I'd love to hear from you. When you're working with a client, how do you go about explaining the inner critic and what that actually looks like for them?
Yeah, so I honestly tried to kind of like personify it. Like, if, you think about the inner critic inside, some people are like, I don't know what that is, or I don't know what like that sounds like. So I use like the language around, hey, can we act as if like your inner critic is a person? What do they look like? What do they sound like? What do they say to you? What's the tone of voice that they're using? Because I think people, I think as humans, we're naturally just pretty hard on ourselves normally. Like, we're our own worst critic is a really common phrase I hear a lot. And so I try to like help clients understand like, okay, your inner critic, is it, are they saying, oh, you're so stupid, or you can't do anything right, or you're not good enough. Mm-hmm. And I think just like figuring out the language that our inner critic uses, but also figuring out like, hey, when does this show up for you? Is it when we make mistakes? Is it when we, are having a hard time? Is it that we should, be better or whatever? Yeah. And I think a lot of that can come from like shame too. Yeah. Like our shame comes out and really, takes over.
Yeah, and so you're building insight and awareness around the inner critic in and of itself. And that language, if y'all aren't aware, that language comes from a therapeutic modality called internal family systems. Mm-hmm. And in a nutshell, this modality is a beautiful therapeutic way to support our clients in understanding that we all have various parts of ourselves that develop, and these parts typically develop in our younger years, and they originally develop to protect us, right, or to try to keep us safe, but then our clients get to us in their later adolescent years or as young adults or even in their midlife, and what they've done is no longer working for them. So maybe your inner critic, you identify like, okay, it started when I was in 6th grade and I started really struggling with math. Raise my hand. Yeah. Math was like a really difficult subject for me. Yeah. And so your client identifies that. And then, so the way that it might have protected them is like, okay, if I can just like be really mean to myself, then I can study enough and I can get a good enough grade, and then my parents will be proud of me. Yeah. Right. So that's an example of how that might have protected you, in air quotations, if you're listening. But then in adulthood, it's no longer working for that person because they feel terrible about themselves all the time. And this inner critic has become this like way of functioning, but again, they feel maybe significant anxiety, depression. Perhaps they have OCD, and this strong inner critic that like beats them up all the time is just exhausting to live with. And so they come to us and they're like, hey, help me. Right? And so this is where we would start to introduce the concept of self-compassion. I don't know if you found this. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but for a lot of clients of mine, we can almost want to like shame or criticize ourselves more once we discover the concept of the inner critic, right? It's like, oh, I have this inner critic. Oh, why do I have this thing? Why am I so mean to myself? And so it can become this like criticism on top of the inner critic. And like, that actually like adds fuel to the fire and makes everything worse, typically.
Totally.
But I think that's also a really natural response to like criticize the inner critic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that people, you know, again, like you said, like once they become aware of it, I think it's like that hyper focus.
Yes.
And you're just like, okay, I am now thinking about every time I'm critical of myself, or I'm thinking about every little mistake I make. And so, yeah, I think people can swing such a far, you know, on the other side of the pendulum.
Yeah. Yeah, and so circling back to like that protective nature of the inner critic, I do think that that invites in a spirit of curiosity and compassion, right? So when we can elicit a picture, whether that's like in our mind or perhaps your therapist encourages you to like bring a picture of your younger self to session, that can help us understand maybe ourselves a little bit more, why the inner critic developed, how it did serve us, and it can help us access a little bit more compassion, not only for our younger selves, but I think also for our adult selves as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Once we can see this through the lens of protection, we are always trying to protect ourselves and to keep ourselves safe, even on like a subconscious level. And so I do think that that is helpful for a lot of clients, especially clients that are like really incredibly harsh towards themselves.
Yeah,
this is part of my story too, right? Like I used to like criticize myself, and I still, you know, notice self-criticism, but I have a lot more tools in my toolbox, so to speak, of how to respond to it. But like it used to be one way that I motivated myself.
Oh, absolutely. I think like, especially when I was in like high school, you know, middle school probably, I was so hard on myself. And I think, you know, having an older brother who was just naturally really smart and didn't really have to work or study for it, I think I was always pushing myself and driving myself like, you have to make A's, you have to make good grades, you have to get the score on a test. And I think in some ways like it, you know, was trying to like help me, but then it turned into me just being really hard on myself. And I've had to really work hard on not being perfectionistic and letting go of being critical of myself in that way. Like if I do notice like now, if it's like, oh, I didn't do that thing just right, then okay, can I choose to be kind to myself in this moment rather than be really harsh and like beat myself up for it?
Yeah. Well, because research shows when we are able to practice self-compassion in that moment, it actually helps us move through that pain and suffering faster, right? So what is actually, it's like this double-edged sword, right? Where we think, okay, if I criticize myself more after I make a mistake, then I'll be able to like fix this mistake. But actually the contrary is true, right? Where if we offer ourselves compassion, we are actually able to like regulate an emotional state in that moment and like move through that mistake faster.
Yep.
We're able to like think about maybe what our options are in that moment. We're able to engage what we would call wise mind from DBT therapy of like, okay, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I know. So then this is what I do. That's my next step in this process.
Yeah. I think Kristen Neff has a really beautiful example in one of her videos. She talks about an example of like a son and a father, and the son doesn't make a great grade on his exam. And so she gives the example of like self-criticism of like, oh, like you're so stupid. Why didn't you do this right? The father telling the son this. But then using self-compassion is more so like, hey, you know, I I know that you want to go to college. I know you want to get good grades. So what do we need to be doing? I'm sorry that you failed this test. Can we get you a tutor, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's just using that more gentle language.
Yeah.
It's just, a much easier way to move through when we do make mistakes or when we do have shortcomings in our life.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned perfectionism, and I think this is important to talk about. So the inner critic, right, and being hard on ourselves can show up in lots of different ways. Some people are perfectionists, and that's how they almost envision their inner critic. Perhaps you have a diagnosis of anxiety, OCD, depression, PTSD, an eating disorder, whatever it might be. And so I think that's important to note as well. It can show up across like the spectrum of mental health diagnoses. And I think a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds struggle with being really, really cruel towards themselves. And so I think it can show up in a lot of different diagnostic ways. And so this is where I love what you mentioned, Megan, like encouraging your clients to really understand their inner critic, get curious about where it comes from, ask yourself if it sounds like anyone. Oftentimes that is true for a lot of our clients. Maybe it sounds like a parental figure or a caregiver, or maybe it even sounds like a bullying experience that a bully that you faced in childhood. So there's lots of different kind of ways that we can seek to understand our inner critic, and lots of different ways that this might show up in our clients too.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think like perfectionism is like the number one thing I see in most of my clients.
Yeah.
Whether, they're an adolescent, they're in school, or even they're an adult, and they're just like feeling like everything has to be perfect or everything has to be done a certain way. And so I think the inner critic can come out really strong in that way. Or, even like eating disorders, it's like that can be a really in like the perfectionism or the rigidity that I see a lot in clients, where it's like, okay, this has to be done a certain way or this has to look a certain way, and getting clients to use self-compassion, but also what I call like the gray area of getting them to not be so black and white and see a different perspective of it.
Yeah.
Because I think that can be a really good way to let go of some of the rigidity or the perfectionism that they are holding on to.
Absolutely. I love that. The gray area.
Yeah.
I will use the language of like flexibility, right? Because that black and white lends itself towards like more inflexibility, more rigidity. And so I think self-compassion for our inner critic really invites in this like flexibility. And it allows us to open up perspective both for ourselves and honestly our relationships as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Like the more that we are able to practice self-compassion for ourselves, I think the more sympathy, empathy we can access for others as well. So that's another benefit of practicing self-compassion.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So if you have a client or maybe a friend that is struggling with self-compassion and implementing some of this for their inner critic, what would you say to them?
I think I start with just having them, like whether it's a client or a friend, just having them be like, okay, you're saying all these like really harsh things to yourself, and you're saying, oh, I'm so stupid, or I'm a failure, or I can't do anything right. And it's like, okay, yeah, again, like treating yourself like you would treat a loved one. It's like, okay, well, what would you say to a loved one? Would you tell someone this? Like, would you say to a friend that like, you're so stupid? It's like, of course not. We would never use that language, and something I think even like that I use with my clients that my therapist told me, she was like, okay, why do you feel like you have the permission to talk the way that you talk to yourself, but you would never talk to your friend like that? And I'm like, yeah, that's so good.
Yeah.
So I think I would start off with that, just like naming that inner critic, but then also just finding ways where it's like, okay, where can you offer yourself, I would say, like an ounce of compassion?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether that's like, can I say like a really kind like mantra to myself, or can I, think about how I would say this to a loved one, or I'm trying to think what else, like even if it's like I can't access the super compassionate part of myself, can I even just neutralize what I'm saying to myself? Yeah. So instead of saying like I'm a failure, it's like, okay, I'm doing the best that I can.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
I love what you talked about, like the ounce of compassion, right? Because I can tend to be this way, but like when I when I learn about a new therapeutic concept, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to practice this all day, every day for the rest of my life.
Same.
And it's like, okay, Laura, let's like dial that back a little bit and recognize that that might not be super realistic, right? But what might be realistic is for me to try practicing self-compassion right when I wake up in the mornings.
Yep, that's great.
For a minute, right? And I kind of think about what the day holds, and think about anything that might be hard, and can I offer myself some kindness in that moment? Can I access an affirmation that is kind towards myself in that moment, right? So I think this is another piece to highlight, right? That self-compassion doesn't have to be this like grandiose thing that takes up hours and hours of our day. Rather, it can be a skill that we start to practice, maybe even more so in the minutia.
Yeah.
And just noticing the effects that might have on us or even our loved ones. And I also think it's important to highlight that self-compassion is not toxic positivity.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
And it's not like negating what is happening for us in the moment, right? So that can be a slippery slope, I think, for a lot of people that either do that or have experienced this from other people, right? So it's not minimizing or fixing or dismissing an emotional state.
Yeah.
It's not trying to like toxic positivity someone out of feeling something hard.
Yeah.
Right? And so that feels important to address as well. Like self-compassion is very intentional. It is mindfulness of the emotional state versus trying to fix or dismiss our emotion. And I think sharing that with at least clients of mine can also just help them have more permission to begin considering even practicing self-compassion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's like, I guess going back to what we said earlier, where I think a lot of my clients will come in, they're like, oh, well, self-compassion is just me like not taking accountability for myself, or self-compassion is just me like coddling myself. Yeah. And it's like, no, there's actually like an accountability piece of self-compassion. Like, it's like, hey, can we be kind to ourselves? And then, hey, can we learn from the mistake that we did? You know, it's not saying like, oh, I just made a mistake and that's it and whatever. You know, it's like, okay, can we like learn from it, keep going, but not sit here and just like berate ourselves for it.
Totally. Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Like how as a society, we tend to swing from one way to sorry, let me backtrack. As a society, we tend to swing from one side to the other, right?
Yes.
It's like, okay, either I am incredibly cruel or I am apathetic. And it's like, I wonder if there's something in the middle ground.
Totally.
So I'm with you there. Yeah. I also think, self-compassion can just feel quite different and scary to practice in the beginning. And so if that's been your experience, I want you to know that you're just not alone in that. It's almost more acceptable to like beat ourselves up as a culture, as a society. And I think this has become something that we do. And I'm here to tell you that like you have permission, and for the record, you don't even need my permission or Megan's permission, but to like engage with yourself differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to live a life maybe that is countercultural to the norm, or perhaps the way that your friends or colleagues talk to themselves. I was actually just talking to a client of mine about that, and it was, something different, like boundaries that colleagues didn't have and that she wants to have and maintain. And it's like, hey, listen, a lot of things that we do for our mental health are not cool. They're not the fad thing to do. And that doesn't mean that we can't start taking steps in the right direction.
Oh, totally. And often I tell my clients and people in general too, like, it takes time to be compassionate towards yourself. Like, it is not an overnight experience. It's not something you just like get and you use immediately. I think we talk a lot in our practice about like the whole neurons that wire together, fire together. And so when you're being really critical of yourself and that's all you've done, it's like, yeah, of course, that's just a natural automatic response that's coming out of you. But then like to use self-compassion, it does take a lot of effort, energy, time, patience to, say like, okay, can I choose to be kind to myself in this moment when I've never done that before? And I think there can be a lot of shame that comes from that sometimes. So I think I always tell people, I'm like, just like, take it really slow. You don't have to like be the self-compassionate guru immediately. Like just say like one nice thing to yourself today, or just give yourself a little bit of grace when you do make this mistake. But it does take time, and it takes, a lot of effort.
And we have to don't want to say careful, but maybe I'm trying to find a better word, but we do have to be kind of mindful, I guess is a better word, of not coupling perfectionism with self-compassion, right?
Yes.
So,
oh my gosh, yes.
The perfectionist can be like, oh my gosh, now that I know about this concept, I'm going to do it and I'm going to do it perfectly.
Oh my gosh,
That's not the goal of self-compassion. And for the record, like I still have experience. I've done a lot of therapy, right? And I still have experiences where I notice like that I'm being really mean to myself, or my husband will lovingly call me out, or people that are close to me, just if they notice maybe some harsh words that I'm using with myself. And so I do think this process is a lifelong process.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not something that is really ever finished. And I think there's a lot of just acceptance and I think humility even that comes with that piece as well.
Yeah, totally. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think often I'll catch myself being really hard on myself, or my husband will, call me out lovingly and say like, hey, maybe let's not use this language that you're using with yourself right now. I'm like, oh yeah, okay. Yeah. So I think I tell my clients all the time with like, even being a therapist, like the things that we teach our clients are things that we're still learning ourselves too. So yeah, I think there's a lot of humility in that.
Yeah, for sure. And we've even like pointed that out for each other in the hallway.
Yeah,
like, okay, I'm struggling. Help me.
Yes.
Oh, man. Well, it's been just a joy chatting with you today.
Yeah.
We actually had a new setup today, and so we're super thrilled to just try this out. And thank you, Megan, for just your wisdom. And I always can share, like, the real authentic things that are going on in both my professional and personal life, and also just count on a good laugh with Megan. So
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as we wrap, I would love for you to share, if you would like, some homework for our listeners or an affirmation today.
Yeah. So I think maybe for some homework, I would tell y'all to, one, just figure out, what does my inner critic sound like? Again, like we talked about, what's the tone of voice? What is it saying? When does it show up for me? And then can I ask myself, like, how would I treat a loved one in this moment? How would I talk to someone when they're going through a hard moment? And can I flip it back on myself? And then an affirmation, I don't know, like maybe I can choose to be kind to myself in this moment, or I deserve kindness in this moment.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. So how can our listeners find you?
Well, I don't have a personal Instagram anymore, but you can find me, email me. It's mchase@anchoredcounselingco.com. I'm on our website under like our team bio. So that's where you can find me.
Yeah. Yeah. And Megan is just truly amazing. I would trust her with a family member. And
You're so sweet.
We've lived a lot of life together at this point, and we've grown a lot together, and it's just been such a sweet relationship that we have built over the years. So thank you all for being here for the Becoming Anchored show, and we will see you next time. Take good care.
Bye.